I knew something was wrong before the lawyer ever opened his mouth. It was a smile. Not a big one. Not the kind that would make everyone turn and stare. Just a small, tight little smile sitting on my cousin Vanessa's face while we stood around my aunt's grave, listening to the preacher talk about mercy and memory and how the dead never truly leave us. Everybody else looked like grief had hollowed them out. My Uncle Raymond kept dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. My younger cousin Patrice stared at the ground the whole time, shoulders shaking under her black coat. Even I, after spending the last 6 months watching Aunt Lila fade away in the old house, felt like my body had turned to stone. But Vanessa looked prepared. She stood there in a fitted black dress with her gloves folded neatly in one hand, chin lifted, mascara dry, like she wasn't burying the woman who had raised half this family. Like she was waiting for the service to end so the real event could begin. When the coffin was lowered into the ground, she looked down at it for exactly 2 seconds, then she looked at the house. I noticed because I was looking at the same thing. Aunt Evelyn's house sat on the hill behind the cemetery road. White paint peeling from the porch, rose bushes bare from winter. Those green shutters she refused to replace hanging crooked on their hinges. To anybody else, it was an old family home. To me, it was every summer of my childhood. It was cornbread cooling in the kitchen window. It was gospel music on Sunday mornings. It was my aunt's laugh rolling through the hallway while she chased us around with a wooden spoon. It was a place I came back to after my divorce, after my layoffs, after life kept kicking me in the teeth and telling me I wasn't enough for the last 2 years. It was also where I slept in the back bedroom so Aunt Evelyn wouldn't be alone. After the first stroke. Vanessa had visited twice in those 2 years. Twice. But that morning, at the graveside, she looked at that house like she already owned the damn thing. I tried to shake it off. Grief makes you suspicious. Pain makes every expression look ugly. That's what I told myself while people offered condolences and weak church hugs and paper plates of food I couldn't stomach. Then Vanessa walked past me, leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume, and said, "You should probably start packing up your room soon. I hear these things move fast after probate." I turned so sharply my heels sank into the wet grass. "What did you say?" She tilted her head, pretending innocence. "Oh? Didn't anybody tell you?" Before I could answer, she was already walking away. That was when the cold started, not outside. Inside. The kind that doesn't touch your skin first. The kind that crawls straight into your ribs and sits there. The lawyer's office was downtown, above an insurance agency and next to a barber shop that had been there since I was a little girl. Mr. Harlan had handled Aunt Evelyn's paperwork for years. He'd done deeds, taxes, insurance claims, all of it. He was old-fashioned, careful, and usually spoke like every word had to pass inspection before leaving his mouth. That day, he couldn't look me in the eye. The family gathered in his conference room around a long dark table polished so hard it reflected the ceiling lights. I sat on one end. Vanessa sat on the other. She crossed one leg over the other like she was waiting for dessert. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat twice before he began. "As you know, Evelyn Mercer executed a final will and testament dated October 14th of last year." Final. The word hit me funny. Aunt Evelyn had made a will years earlier. I knew because she told me herself one night while I was sorting her pills. She laughed and said, "Baby, don't look so nervous. I'm not dying tonight. I'm just making sure this family doesn't tear itself apart over my curtains." I remember that. I remember because she had squeezed my hand and said, "You've been the only one here. Don't let anybody make you feel invisible when I'm gone." So when Mr. Harlan began reading a document that left the house, the savings, the land, and even her jewelry collection to Vanessa, I honestly thought I had misheard him. I waited for the correction. It never came. My Uncle Raymond got the old truck. Patrice got a small education fund. 2 charities got modest donations. And me, the woman who bathed her, fed her, drove her to every appointment, cleaned her sheets, when she was too ashamed to ask, I got Aunt Evelyn's Bible. That was it. Her Bible. By the time Mr. Harlan finished, the room had gone silent in that ugly, electric way silence turns when everybody knows something is wrong. But nobody wants to be first to say it. Vanessa folded her hands on the table. "Well," she said softly, "I know this is emotional for everyone." I looked at her. Then I looked at Mr. Harlan. Then at the signature on the copy placed before me. It looked like Aunt Evelyn's name, but not like her hand. I had seen that signature hundreds of times on checks, birthday cards, church donation envelopes, pharmacy receipts. My aunt wrote with a firm, slanted hand, fast but clean. Like she had no patience for hesitation. This signature looked careful, constructed, like someone trying to remember how confidence was supposed to look. "I want to see the original," I said. Harlan hesitated just a second too long. Vanessa's eyes flicked to him so fast I almost missed it. "It's in secure file storage," he said. "This copy is legally sufficient for today's reading." I said I want to see the original. Uncle Raymond sighed like I was embarrassing him. Loretta, now is not the time, the hell it isn't. Vanessa sat back in her chair. You always did have trouble accepting reality. I turned toward her so sharply my chair legs scraped the floor. Reality? You visited that woman twice in 2 years. Twice, you didn't clean her. You didn't feed her. You didn't sit up with her when she forgot what decade she was in. And cry because she thought her mother had died yesterday. Her voice stayed smooth. And maybe that's exactly why she didn't leave you the house. Maybe she didn't want guilt buying loyalty. That hit the room hard, a cheap line. A cruel one. But cruel lines work because they leave stains. Dotmer, Harlan asked everyone to calm down. He said contests could be addressed through proper channels. He said emotions were high. He said all the safe, dry little things men say when truth is standing in the room with a knife in its chest. But when everybody got up to leave, I stayed seated. Dotmer, Harlan started gathering papers. His hands were shaking. I need a moment with you, I said. Vanessa paused at the door. Be careful, counselor. She's going to accuse everyone except herself. Patrice shot Vanessa a look sharp enough to cut skin. But Vanessa only smiled and left when the door shut. I stood. You knew, I said. Dotmer, Harlan frowned without conviction. Loretta, you knew something about that document was wrong. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I am not at liberty to discuss privileged. I was with Aunt Evelyn 3 days before she died. That made him stop. She asked me where the blue folder was. He looked up. I stepped closer. Blue leather folder. Her words. She said, make sure they don't take the blue one. At the time I thought she was confused from the medication. But now? Now I'm wondering why a dying woman was worried somebody would take a folder. Mr. Harlan swallowed. And right then I knew. Maybe not everything. But enough to know he was afraid. Enough to know this whole thing stank. When I got back to the house, Vanessa was already there. Of course she was. She stood in the front hallway giving directions to 2 men in work jackets. Like she was running an estate sale instead of mourning a death. That mirror goes, she said. The silver tea set too. And nobody touches a dining room cabinet until I inventory it. I dropped my purse on the entry table. Get out of this house. She didn't even turn around. Legally, this is my house now. Probate hasn't even cleared. She finally faced me. Then let's call it an early transition. Those men looked from her to me, realizing too late they had walked into family business. I stared at them until they mumbled something about coming back later, and backed right out the front door. Vanessa waited until their truck pulled off before her whole face changed. The softness disappeared. The fake sympathy. The polished church girl act. You always thought she loved you best, she said. That was your problem. I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because anger sometimes comes out sounding crazy. My problem? My problem is that I can smell a lie before it finishes getting dressed. She stepped closer. Be careful. People in town already think you were circling the house before she died. That one landed. Because it meant someone had been talking, maybe her. Maybe more than her, she was my aunt and my blood. You showed up for holidays. I showed up for everything else and still, she said, tapping one manicured nail against the folded copy of the will in her hand. She chose me. Then she walked past me and out the door like she hadn't just struck a match in a room full of gas. I didn't cry until that night. Not because of the money. Not because of the house, because grief is one thing. But being erased? That's another kind of death. I sat in Aunt Evelyn's bedroom surrounded by the smell of cold cream, starch, and lavender sachets, and I tried to make sense of the last few weeks of her life. She had been weaker, yes, more forgetful, but not gone. Not gone enough to mistake Vanessa for devotion. Not gone enough to reward absence and punish care. I opened her bedside drawer looking for a handkerchief and found instead a church bulletin, folded around a pharmacy receipt, a half-finished crossword and a tiny brass key attached to a faded green ribbon. I stared at it. The key was old. Not for a modern lock. Something private. Something chosen. I turned it over in my hand and felt a jolt of memory. Aunt Evelyn in the kitchen. 3 weeks before she died, half asleep in her chair, whispering, "Don't let them empty the drawer before the truth gets aired." At the time I thought she meant the dresser. Maybe the kitchen drawer with the bills. Maybe nothing at all. But now there was a key in my hand and a knot forming in my stomach. I went through the room carefully, not frantic. Not yet. Methodical. Inside the closet behind winter coats. I found nothing but old shoes and a cedar box of photographs. In the bathroom cabinet, nothing but peroxide and lotions. Under the mattress, only an envelope full of church donation receipts. In the bottom dresser drawer beneath folded slips and sweaters, I found a false cardboard base so thin I almost missed it. My breath caught. I lifted it. There. Hidden flat beneath the drawer was a packet wrapped in wax paper. Inside were 3 things: a copy of a property deed, a letter addressed in Aunt Evelyn's handwriting, and a bank deposit slip dated 9 days before she died. The deed was old, not the will. But I recognized the parcel number for the house immediately. The deposit slip was stranger. $10,000 cash deposited into Aunt Evelyn's account, and Evelyn did not deal in cash. Aunt Evelyn barely trusted online banking, let alone walked around with $10,000 in bills. Then I unfolded the letter. My hands shook so hard I had to sit down on the floor. Loretta, if you are reading this, it means one of two things. Either I got stubborn enough to outlive everybody, or somebody moved faster than I expected. That was the first line. I covered my mouth. The next lines were shakier, like they'd been written in pieces. Harlan has been pressing me to sign papers when I am tired. Vanessa keeps arriving when my medicine makes me sleepy. They say they are helping me organize, but I do not trust how often they ask where I keep the blue folder. If I have not had the chance to fix things properly, do not believe any paper signed when I was ill without witnesses from the church. I have made mistakes in this family. I know that. I tried to love everybody evenly and ended up feeding snakes and starving doves. The house was never meant for greed. It was meant for the one who stayed. By the time I reached that line, I was crying too hard to see clearly. I read the rest anyway. There was no full confession, no final legal declaration. Aunt Evelyn had been too smart for grand dramatics, but the message was clear enough to set my bones on fire. She had suspected pressure. She had feared manipulation. And she had tried, in the little strength she had left, to leave a trail. The blue folder. That was the center of it. And now it was missing. I didn't sleep. I sat at her vanity until dawn, reading the letter over and over until the words burned themselves into me. At 6:30 in the morning, I drove straight to Mount Olive Baptist and asked if Sister Bernice was there. If anybody knew Aunt Evelyn's business, it was Bernice. They had sung in the choir together for 35 years, fought over hymn tempos, and once nearly split the women's committee over whether pineapple belonged in pound cake. Bernice was sharp, proud, and too old to be scared of rich relatives when she saw my face. She didn't ask permission to speak plain. What did that girl do? I handed her the letter. She read it standing beside the Fellowship Hall coffee urn, lips thinning more with every line. When she finished, she looked at me over her glasses and said, I knew that child was circling like a vulture, you knew? I knew Vanessa started taking an interest awful sudden. And I knew Harlan was over at the house after dark the week Evelyn missed Bible study. That made my head snap up. After dark? Bernice nodded. I was dropping off soup. Saw his car by the side gate. Didn't think much of it then. Thought maybe he was handling papers. But Evelyn told me 2 days later she was tired of folks putting documents in front of her. When she was medicated, there it was, a witness, not legal proof yet. But not just my word anymore. Did she ever mention a blue folder? I asked. Bernice frowned, thinking. Then her eyes widened. Safety deposit box. I grabbed the edge of the table. What? She told me once, after her first stroke, that if this family ever started acting hungry around her property, she let the bank hold what mattered. She said the folder had copies of everything: deed, will, insurance, a letter to the pastor. Maybe more. Did she say which bank? Bernice closed her eyes, searching memory. First Commonwealth, branch on Mercer Street. She said she liked that one because the manager was a woman who didn't gossip. My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. If the blue folder had been moved to a safety deposit box, then Vanessa might not have it. And if Vanessa didn't have it, she might not know how close she was to losing everything she thought she'd stolen. I drove to the bank with Aunt Evelyn's hidden letter in my bag and a prayer. I didn't trust in my mouth. But halfway there, my phone rang. Patrice. I almost didn't answer. She had always tried to stay neutral, the poor thing. Neutral people mean well, but they usually arrive late to the truth. Still, I picked up. Asterisk. Her voice came in a whisper. Loretta, don't go to the house. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Why? Because Vanessa's there. And she's not alone. The light turned red. I stopped hard. Who's with her? Patrice was silent for one breath too long. Then she said, the locksmith. And that's when I knew this had moved beyond greed. Vanessa wasn't waiting for probate. She was hunting. I turned the car around so fast the tires screamed. By the time I reached Aunt Evelyn's house, Vanessa's black SUV was parked crooked near the porch, and a white locksmith van sat behind it with the back doors open. A man in a navy jacket was carrying his toolbox toward the side entrance. Like this was any other paid job on any other quiet street. I slammed my door and marched across the yard before either one of them could pretend this was respectable. What are you doing? The locksmith stopped first. Vanessa didn't. She stood on the porch with her purse tucked under one arm, keys in hand, looking irritated that I had interrupted her timetable. Changing the locks, she said. Obviously, probate is not settled. That didn't stop you from snooping through her room, did it? That hit me like a brick. I kept my face still. But inside, Everything sharpened. She knew. Or at least she suspected. That meant one of two things. Either she had already searched the house and found something missing, or she was bluffing and fishing. With Vanessa, both were possible. The locksmith looked from her to me and made the mistake of asking, "Ma'am, is there a dispute here?" "Yes," I said. "No," Vanessa said at the same time. I stepped up onto the porch. "There is absolutely a dispute. Until the estate is legally processed, you should not be changing anything without court authority." Vanessa smiled the way people do when they think volume is the same thing as power. "Please, spare him your little TV law speech." I turned to the locksmith. "You do one damn thing to the store, and your company's gonna be part of a lawsuit before supper." That got his attention. He took one slow step back. "Look, I don't want no trouble." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "You were paid and I can refund it," he said quickly. "Good man." He carried his toolbox back to the van while Vanessa stood on the porch, breathing hard through her nose, trying to stay elegant and failing. Once the van pulled away, she dropped the act. "You really think you can bully your way into stealing what Aunt Evelyn gave me?" "No," I said. "But I think you're panicking." That touched a nerve. Her face changed for half a second. Just enough. Then she laughed. "Panicking? Over what?" "Over whatever you expected to find in this house before I did." She came down the porch steps slowly. "You really want to do this out here? In front of neighbors?" I leaned in. "I want to know why you needed the locks changed before the body was barely cold." Her voice lowered. "Because I know how desperate women behave when they lose a free place to live." That was Vanessa's gift. She always knew where dignity was thinnest and went for that spot first. But that day, she overplayed it because cruelty makes people sloppy and sloppy people leave openings. I looked past her toward the hallway, toward the stairs that led up to Aunt Evelyn's room. "You didn't come here for furniture." Her eyes flaked toward the house. There it was, that tiny, fast, but real. I smiled. "You're hunting for something for the first time that week." Vanessa didn't have a comeback ready. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I'm securing family property," she said. "No," I said. "You're looking for something you thought would already be gone." She stepped back, chin lifting. "Get off this property." I laughed right in her face. "Take me to court." Then I walked past her and into the house before she could stop me. She followed, heels hitting the hardwood hard enough to sound like gunshots. "Loretta." I didn't answer. I went straight to Aunt Evelyn's bedroom, stood in the doorway, and took in the damage. The bedspread had been pulled crooked. The closet doors were open. The top dresser drawer was half out. Boxes from the hall linen cabinet had been moved onto the floor. Someone had already been searching. I turned slowly. Vanessa stopped in the doorway, breathing too fast for someone who claimed everything was under control. "You should be ashamed," I said quietly. She folded her arms. "You don't know what you're talking about, no? Then why tear apart a dead woman's room?" She was my aunt too. That's not what I asked. For a second I thought she might lunge at me. Instead, she leaned one shoulder against the frame and said, "You always did mistake service for importance." I ignored that. "What are you looking for?" "Nothing." "Then you won't mind if I call Patrice and Uncle Raymond over here right now and let them see what you've been doing?" Her mouth flattened. I took out my phone. "Fine." She snapped. I stopped. The room got quiet. Even the old radiator seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa uncrossed her arms and looked past me, not at me. "I'm looking for paperwork." "What paperwork?" "Estate paperwork." "No." "Try again." She said nothing. I stepped closer. "Blue folder." Her head turned so sharply it might as well have been a confession. That was all I needed. I put my phone back in my pocket, but I didn't relax. "So you know about it." Her voice came back cold. "Everybody knows old people keep papers in folders." "No," I said. "Not everybody knows the color." Her lips parted, then closed. Checkmate for the moment. I could almost hear her recalculating how much I knew, how much I was bluffing. Whether she should deny, threaten, or pivot, she chose. "Anger, you have no proof of anything." "I have enough." "You have grief and imagination." "I have Aunt Evelyn's handwriting that hit dead center." She went still. Just still. "It is amazing how much guilt looks like silence when you're finally close enough to see it." "You're lying," she said. I wasn't going to show my cards, not yet. Not until I knew what was in the bank. So I gave her a version of the truth sharp enough to cut, but vague enough to keep my advantage. "She left something behind. Something that makes it very clear she was afraid of you." Vanessa's nostrils flared. "Afraid of me?" "She wrote about documents being pushed in front of her while she was medicated. That did it." The mask cracked. "Only a little. But enough. You always twist things," she said too quickly. She was confused near the end. "Everybody knows that." "Interesting," I said. I didn't say what date she wrote it. She stared at me. Then she did something even more useful than admitting guilt. She got careless. "If she wrote anything, Harlan will say it wasn't legally binding. The room went silent. I smiled very slowly. I see. She realized what she had done at the same moment I did. She had linked herself to Harlan's defense before I even mentioned his name. We stood there staring at each other while the old house groaned around us. Then she straightened up and said, "Get out." "No." I said, "Get out." "I heard you." She stepped aside from the door. "Then stay. Dig through her drawers. Sleep in her bed. It won't change the law." She started down the hall, then paused without turning around. "But if I were you," she said, "I'd stop chasing hidden folders and start looking at whether that little letter of yours is enough to keep a roof over your head." Then she left. I didn't move for a full minute after the front door slammed because that was the first time she had confirmed to things without meaning to. First, she knew about the blue folder. Second, she was scared that I had something in writing that meant the folder mattered more than the will she was waving around, which meant First Commonwealth Bank mattered too. I drove there with every nerve in my body wound tight. The Mercer Street branch was smaller than I remembered. Red brick, polished glass, and one of those fake potted plants by the entrance that tries too hard to look expensive. Inside, everything smelled like printer toner, lemon cleaner, and money trying to act innocent. The branch manager was a woman named Denise Cole, mid-50s, silver-framed glasses, voice so calm it made people tell the truth faster than they intended. I didn't know if she remembered Aunt Evelyn, but the moment I said her name, something softened in her face. "Miss Mercer," she said quietly, "I'm very sorry for your loss." That gave me a sliver of hope. I explained as carefully as I could. Not the whole mess, just enough. My aunt had passed, there was a dispute regarding estate documents, and I needed to know whether Aunt Evelyn maintained a safety deposit box at this branch. Denise folded her hands. "I can't release contents without proper authority." "I understand. I'm not asking you to break procedure." "What authority do you have?" "None yet," I admitted. "But I do have reason to believe there may be original estate documents being contested." She studied me for a long moment. "Are you the executor?" "No." "Then legally, I can't grant access." That part one expected. It still felt like being kicked out. I opened my bag anyway and took out Aunt Evelyn's letter. "Would you at least read this?" Denise hesitated, then nodded once. She read the letter in silence, eyes moving carefully line by line. When she finished, she placed it down with the kind of gentleness people use around loaded weapons. "This is not legal authority," she said. "I know. But..." She stopped up. My heart jumped. "But..." She took off her glasses and looked at me directly. "Your aunt did, in fact, maintain a safety deposit box here." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the chair. "I cannot open it for you," she continued, "and I cannot discuss its contents. But I can tell you that your aunt filed an access instruction with the box." My mouth went dry. "What kind of instruction?" "Release upon death under specific conditions." Every word felt like a door unlocking. "What conditions?" "That the box may be opened in the presence of the branch manager and the family attorney, or in the presence of a court order, or," she checked something on her screen, "in the presence of a named church representative if the family attorney is under dispute." I stared at her. "Aunt Evelyn, you brilliant old woman. She named a church representative?" Denise nodded. "Pastor Elijah Boone of Mount Olive Baptist." I almost laughed from the sheer force of relief. Vanessa didn't know. If she had known, she never would have been tearing up Aunt Evelyn's bedroom like a raccoon in church clothes. "She planned for this," I whispered. Denise said nothing, but her expression told me she had come to the same conclusion. I leaned forward. "Can the box be opened today?" She considered. "If Pastor Boone can be present, and if you can provide the death certificate copy and identity verification, then yes. As long as the access instruction is valid and no restraining legal order has been filed." I stood up so fast my chair scraped. "Thank you." She held up a hand. "Do not thank me yet. If there are documents inside, they may complicate matters. And if the family attorney is implicated, you need litigation counsel immediately." "I understand." "No," she said gently. "You understand emotionally. I need you to understand strategically." That sobered me. She was right. This was no longer a family argument. This was a legal war with church clothes draped over it. I left the bank and drove straight to Mount Olive again. Pastor Boone was in his office meeting with a deacon about roof repairs. But when he saw my face and the letter in my hand, he sent the deacon out without a second thought. He read everything. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath through his nose. "Evelyn suspected this before she died," he said. "Yes, and she trusted the church to stand in the gap if family failed her." "Yes." He looked up at me. "Then that's what we'll do." By 3:30 that afternoon, we were back at First Commonwealth with Pastor Boone, the death certificate copy, my ID, and enough tension to crack tile. Denise met us privately and brought US to a secure room at the rear of the branch where the safety deposit boxes were kept. I will never forget the sound of that metal drawer sliding open. It wasn't loud, but it sounded like judgment. Denise placed the box on the table and stepped back. Pastor Boone stood beside me, one hand folded over the other, not touching anything. Inside were exactly what Aunt Evelyn had promised in spirit, if not by name. The blue folder, still there. Vanessa had never found it. I almost cried from the sight of it alone. But relief lasted about 2 seconds before reality came rushing back. Because if this folder held what I thought it held, then the next part of my life was about to become very ugly. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of the deed, insurance papers, tax records, medical notes, a typed memorandum signed by Aunt Evelyn 6 months before her death. And under all of that a sealed envelope marked in thick black ink. Open if there was trouble after my funeral. My hands shook so hard Pastor Boone had to pull out the chair for me. Sit down, Loretta, I sat. I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized statement, not a will. Not exactly, but close enough to change everything. Aunt Evelyn wrote that she had prepared a revised estate plan after her first stroke, that she intended for her residence and surrounding land to pass to me, Loretta James, in recognition of daily care, sacrifice, companionship, and the keeping of my person with dignity. She also stated that she feared pressure from Vanessa Mercer and undue influence through repeated private document visits, arranged by attorney Walter Harlan when I am weak, medicated, or alone. There were dates, names, a list of 3 occasions Harlan had visited outside normal office scheduling, a note that Sister Bernice and Pastor Boone had both expressed concern over Vanessa's sudden involvement, and at the very bottom, in Aunt Evelyn's uneven but unmistakably fierce handwriting, if a later will appears giving Vanessa my home, I asked that it be challenged with every lawful step available. I did not raise that girl to mistake access for love. I sat there with tears running down my face. Pastor Boone whispered, Lord have mercy, but the folder wasn't. Done behind the statement was another item, a photocopy of a cashier's check issued from Aunt Evelyn's account to Walter Harlan's office trust account for estate planning. Revisions, dated 5 weeks before her death, stapled to it was Harlan's own office. Note. Type. Short. Damning. Client fatigued. Niece VM requests we finalized today before LJ returns from pharmacy. I couldn't breathe for a second. There it was, not full proof of fraud, but enough to blow the room open. Enough to show secrecy, enough to show timing, enough to show Vanessa and Harlan had coordinated around my absence. Denise, who had remained professionally distant until then, quietly said, You need counsel tonight. Pastor Boone nodded. And not somebody from this county who plays golf with Harlan. She gave us the name of an estate litigator in the next city over. A woman known for tearing apart probate misconduct cases without blinking. By 6 that evening, I was sitting in a clean glass office across from attorney Celeste Monroe, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt like somebody stronger than grief had entered the room. She read everything without interrupting me once. When she finished, she stacked the papers into precise lines and said, All right, that was all. Not interesting, not maybe, just all right. I leaned forward. Is it enough? It's enough to file emergency motions, seek an injunction against transfer or sale, demand production of the original will, subpoena Harlan's records, and depose everyone involved. And the house. Nobody touches that house, she said flatly, if I can help it. I almost broke right there. Not because the fight was over, because for the first time it had actually begun. Celeste worked fast. By the next morning she had filed notice challenging probate, requested a temporary restraining order to prevent any change of locks, sale, removal of contents, or transfer of title, and sent demands to Harlan's office for production of the original executed will, witness records, and file notes. Then we waited. And waiting is where a lot of people lose nerve. But I didn't. Because once you've read a dead woman's last warning in her own hand, patience stops feeling passive. It feels like loading a weapon. 2 days later, Vanessa made her move. She came to the house just after noon. All dressed cream and gold like innocence had hired a stylist. She carried a folder and a smile and knocked on the door like we were friends. I opened it but didn't invite her in. She looked over my shoulder into the hallway. Still here? Still breathing too. She ignored that. I came to offer peace. I laughed so hard I had to lean against the frame. Peace? Yes, I know you're upset. I know grief makes people irrational. So I'm willing to be generous. That word again, generous, coming from a thief. She lifted the folder slightly. If you agree to vacate the property quietly and withdraw your little accusations, I'll make sure you receive enough to relocate comfortably. I stared at her. Then I understood. She was testing me. Maybe Celeste's filings had rattled her. Maybe Harlan had started sweating. Maybe the injunction scared her more than she wanted to admit. Either way, She was here to buy silence. You came to bribe me off my own porch, I said. Her smile tightened. I came to prevent ugly things from becoming public. I let that hang in the air. Then I said, you should have thought about that before you searched her bedroom with a locksmith parked outside. For the first time, she looked uncertain. You have no evidence of anything. You keep telling yourself that. Loretta, she said, voice dropping, there are things in this family you do not understand. That line was meant to sound mysterious, powerful, like she had some hidden truth waiting to flip the whole story, but it sounded rehearsed. So I took a shot. Does one of those things involve Harlan's office note about finalizing papers before I got back from the pharmacy? The blood drained from her face, not all at once, slowly, like a curtain being pulled. Beautiful. That was when I knew the note was real enough to scare her more than the letter did. She swallowed once. You're bluffing. No. She looked down at the folder in her hands, and that, right there, was the biggest mistake she had made so far. Because instinct made her glance at what she had come to use, a folder. Cream-colored. Bulging. My eyes narrowed. What's in there? Nothing that concerns you. Is that the original? She clutched it tighter. I didn't wait. I stepped off the porch, grabbed the edge of the folder, and she yanked back so hard papers spilled out between us like birds shot from the sky. We both froze. On top of the scattered pages lay a photograph. Not of the house, not of Aunt Evelyn, of Walter, Harlan. And Vanessa. Standing together outside a restaurant. To close, too familiar. His hand at the small of her back. My eyes lifted slowly to hers. She snatched for the picture, but I was faster. I picked it up, turned it over on the back in blue ink. A date? 8 months before Aunt Evelyn died. You stupid, arrogant woman. This wasn't just greed. This was alliance, possibly more than alliance. And if Harlan had been compromised personally before the will revisions, then everything about his professional handling just got filthier. Vanessa lunged for the photograph. Give me that. I stepped back. She followed. Give it back. Her voice had gone shrill enough to pull curtains back across the street. I held up the picture. You and Harlan. It's not what you think. That's convenient. Because what I think keeps getting worse. She looked around the yard, realizing too late that neighbors were now watching from windows and porches. Good. Let them. She lowered her voice. Listen to me. You don't know what Evelyn promised me. I went still. There it was, not left me, not wanted me to have. Promised me. As in spoken privately, as in something Vanessa believed she was owed even before the paperwork. What did she promise you? I asked. Vanessa's eyes flashed. What she should have given me from the beginning. That was not proof, but it was motive. A motive, once it starts talking, rarely shuts up in time. I bent down and picked up another fallen page before she could stop me. It was a draft, a will draft, not final, marked with its dot, and in the corner, handwritten initials. VM. I looked at her. Then at the page, then back at her. You edited it? No. You annotated a will draft? No. You touched estate drafts with your own damn initials on them. Her breathing turned ragged. I could see her trying to build a life fast enough to outrun what was already in the yard between us. She couldn't, not this time. I slipped the photograph and the marked page into my bag. Vanessa stared at me like I'd stolen her oxygen. That's privileged, she hissed. I smiled. So sue me. Then I stepped back onto the porch and closed the door in her face. I stood there with my hand on the knob, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, while she hammered once against the wood and shouted my name. I didn't open it. I just leaned my forehead against the door and whispered, Aunt Evelyn. I got her and outside. For the first time since the funeral, Vanessa Mercer sounded afraid. I barely slept that night. Not because I was scared. Because adrenaline has a way of making your body feel awake, even when your spirit is tired enough to collapse. I kept seeing the photograph every time I closed my eyes. Vanessa and Walter Harlan standing too close outside that restaurant, his hand at her back like they shared more than paperwork. Then the draft page with her initials in the corner. VM written small, but not small enough, careless, conceited. The kind of mark people leave when they think they'll never be questioned. By 7 the next morning, I was in Celeste Monroe's office with the photograph, the draft page, Aunt Evelyn's blue folder, and a cup of coffee I never touched. Celeste spread everything across her conference table in straight, clean lines like she was preparing an autopsy. She picked out the photo first. Good, she said. I blinked. Good, yes, messy evidence is often better than polished evidence. Polished evidence can be explained away. Messy evidence usually comes from panic. She flipped the photo over, studied the date, then set it aside and picked out the draft page with Vanessa's initials. This, she said, tapping the corner with one fingernail, is potentially devastating. Because she touched it? Because if she had access to draft estate language before execution, she was involved beyond the role of beneficiary. That opens the door to undue influence. document shaping, and direct interference. I sat forward. Can we prove that? Celeste looked at me over the top of the page. We don't need to prove everything all at once. We need to prove enough to make the court stop trusting their story. That woman was cold in the most beautiful way. She spent the next hour building the case like a contractor reinforcing a weak house before a storm. Emergency injunction remained in place. We would seek immediate forensic review of the signature on the final will. We would subpoena Harlan's office drafts, communications, visitor logs, billing records, and any witness information tied to the execution. We would also compel disclosure of Aunt Evelyn's medical records. For the week surrounding the will date. Then Celeste did something I hadn't expected. She smiled. Not warmly. Not softly. More like a wolf discovering the fence around the sheep had been built by amateurs. What? I asked. Harlan made a classic error. What error? He left notes. I frowned. That office note? That unlikely more. Men like him always think they're controlling the record when they type things for themselves. They forget typed notes become evidence when the room changes. She picked up Aunt Evelyn's notarized statement from the blue folder. She documented suspicion. Your church witnesses document a concern. The bank confirms she anticipated a dispute. Vanessa appeared at the property with a locksmith before probate stabilized. Now we have a relationship photograph and a marked draft. They don't know it yet, but they're already bleeding. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Then my phone buzzed. Patrice. I answered immediately. Her voice was low and shaking. Loretta. Uncle Raymond just got served to. Served with what? Some kind of notice. He's furious. He says you're humiliating the family. Celeste held out a hand, and I put the phone on speaker. Patrice kept going. Vanessa's telling everybody you forged that letter and manipulated Aunt Evelyn while she was sick. Celeste's mouth tightened, but she didn't look surprised. I asked, where are you? At Uncle Raymond's house. Vanessa came by this morning. She's trying to get him to sign something. Celeste spoke up immediately. Patrice, listen carefully. Do not let him sign a damn thing. Put the paper away, take photos if you can, and tell him any new document tied to the estate goes through counsel. Patrice went quiet for half a second. Who is this? My name is Celeste Monroe. I represent Loretta, and unless your cousin wants a sanctions hearing, she should stop circulating paperwork today. There was a rustling sound, then Patrice whispered. I knew it. I knew she was up to something. Can you get us a photo of the document? Celeste asked. Yes, do it now. The call ended. Celeste looked at me. There's your next problem. What kind of problem? Vanessa's trying to clean the edges of the story before we get to court. She's getting desperate. Yes, Celeste said. And desperate people usually split into two categories. Those who shut up, and those who talk too much. Vanessa strikes me as a talker. She was right. By noon. Patrice had sent photographs of the document Vanessa tried to get Uncle Raymond to sign. It was framed as a family harmony statement. According to it, Raymond was supposed to affirm that Aunt Evelyn had repeatedly expressed disappointment in me, concern that I felt entitled to her home, and trust in Vanessa's financial maturity. It was garbage, worse than garbage. It was strategy disguised as sentiment. And at the bottom, in fine print, was a line acknowledging that the final will reflected Aunt Evelyn's long-standing and repeatedly voiced intentions. Celeste read it once and actually laughed. That's not just stupid, she said. That's useful. How? Because now Vanessa is soliciting narrative support after death. That suggests she knows the actual record is weak. She had the photograph document attached to a supplemental filing within the year. Then came the signature issue. Celeste hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Miriam Sloan, who looked like the kind of woman who could read a lie just from the pressure marks left by a pen. She reviewed copies first, then demanded access to the original final will for comparison against verified handwriting samples from Aunt Evelyn's checks, church records, recipe cards, donation logs, and personal letters. By then, Harlan was under pressure to produce the original. He delayed. Of course he delayed. His office responded with procedural objections, complaints about timing, and one pompous letter accusing Celeste of manufacturing scandal from grief. Celeste read that letter, set it down, and said, "Good. He's emotional now." She filed a motion to compel. The hearing was set for Friday morning. That gave Vanessa 3 days to unravel. And Lord, did she use them? She called me twice from blocked numbers. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail anyway. Her voice was soft. Too soft, the kind of softness people put on when they want to sound wounded instead of dangerous. Loretta, this is getting out of hand. You're letting strangers tear the family apart. Aunt Evelyn was confused near the end. And I know you loved her. But if you keep pushing this, ugly things about your time in that house are going to come out to you. I listened to it twice, then took it straight to Celeste. She threatened me. Celeste nodded. Indirectly. Which is even better. How is that better? Because clean threats are deniable. Dirty ones reveal mindset. She preserved the voicemail and added it to the stack. By Friday, the courtroom was full enough to make the air feel crowded. Small-town probate hearings usually don't pull spectators unless there's money, scandal, or a respectable family about to split in public. We had all three. Vanessa arrived in ivory again, which told me she still thought this was a pageant. Walter Harlan came in gray, sweating lightly at the temples, carrying a leather briefcase like it still meant authority. Uncle Raymond looked angry in all directions. Patrice looked sick. Sister Bernice came in wearing church blue and sat behind me like judgment had chosen a hat. Pastor Boone sat beside her. When Celeste walked in, she didn't rush, didn't look around, didn't acknowledge anybody. She set her file boxes down on council table like she was unloading bricks for a foundation, and took her seat. I loved her a little for that. The judge, Eleanor Pike, had served on the county bench long enough to recognize vanity when it walked in dressed as innocence. She was silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and known for hating probate games because, in her words, dead people can't come back to clean up your foolishness. That morning, she looked especially unimpressed. The issue before the court was narrow on paper: enforcement of the injunction, production of the original will, an argument over whether there was enough basis to continue formal challenge proceedings. But everybody in that room knew the real question was bigger. Had Aunt Evelyn Mercer's will been manipulated? Harlan's attorney spoke first. Slick voice, expensive tie. Tried to make it sound like a grieving caretaker had become delusional after being left a sentimental item instead of property. He called the letter from Aunt Evelyn emotional but non-dispositive. He minimized the church witnesses. He implied I had motive, access, and resentment. He said Vanessa had been unfairly vilified for stepping up after death to manage chaos. Then Celeste stood and the whole room changed. She didn't shout, didn't posture, didn't perform. She just started placing facts where they belonged until their version of reality looked like cheap furniture and good lighting. Aunt Evelyn documented concern about private document visits while medicated. Church witnesses observed those visits and heard related complaints. The decedent created a bank release structure specifically designed to bypass family counsel. If that counsel became compromised, the sole beneficiary of the disputed will attempted to change locks and search the decedent's bedroom before probate stabilization. That same beneficiary then circulated post-death narrative statements for family signature. We now also have a state draft material bearing her initials and evidence of a personal relationship with the drafting attorney predating death. You could feel people around us sit straighter. Vanessa's attorney objected twice. Judge Pike overruled both times. Then came the production order. Harlan had no choice. Under direct instruction from the court, he opened his briefcase and surrendered the original final will for in-camera review and forensic examination. That moment was delicious. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the sound of paper leaving the hands of a man who had lost control of its story. Judge Pike reviewed the original briefly, then directed that Dr. Miriam Sloan be sworn in. Dr. Sloan was calm the way surgeons are calm because panic is for people who haven't trained. She explained handwriting fluency, natural pen pressure, stroke hesitation, terminal lift patterns, baseline consistency. Half the courtroom looked confused. The other half looked worried. Then she got to the point. In my professional opinion, she said, the signature on the disputed will is not a naturally executed example of Evelyn Mercer's standard signature pattern. The room went still, not even coughing. Nothing. She continued, it appears to be a simulated signature, likely produced by a writer attempting to replicate known characteristics while lacking the motor confidence of the original author. Vanessa's attorney shot up so fast his chair nearly tipped. Objection, premature conclusion. Judge Pike cut him off. Sit down. She's the expert you had a chance to question. And then it got better, because Dr. Sloan also identified inconsistencies in initials placed onto internal draft pages, recovered from Vanessa's loose papers. Those initials matched Vanessa's known handwriting sample from a signed family statement she had circulated. Celeste didn't smile. She didn't need to. She called Patrice next. Poor Patrice looked terrified, walking to the stand. But truth has a way of stiffening the spine once it's finally in your mouth. She testified that Vanessa had come to Uncle Raymond's house after the challenge began, asking him to sign a document affirming Aunt Evelyn's alleged intentions. She testified that Vanessa had framed it as helping the judge understand the family. She testified that Vanessa had insisted the document needed to be dated back a few days so it wouldn't look reactive. That last line hit like thunder. Vanessa closed her eyes. Just once, but I saw it then. Celeste called Sister Bernice. If Patrice gave the room unease, Bernice gave it fire. She told the court about seeing Harlan's car at Aunt Evelyn's house after dark. She repeated Aunt Evelyn's complaints about papers being pushed in front of her while medicated. She said in her clear church lady voice Evelyn Mercer was many things, but she was not foolish. When she said somebody was trying to move too fast around her house, I believed her then, and I believe her now. Harlan's attorney tried to paint her as biased. Bernice looked him dead in the eye and said, "Baby, I am old, not biased." There is a difference. Even Judge Pike had to hide a smile. At that one dot then came the turn, the part I had been waiting for. Celeste called Walter. Harlan, watching him walk to the stand was like watching a man realize his expensive shoes won't stop a floor from collapsing. He sat, swore to tell the truth, adjusted his cuffs twice, didn't look at Vanessa. Celeste started gently. She established his years in practice, his relationship with Aunt Evelyn, his role in prior estate planning, his visits, his records, his trust account, his office procedures. He answered in that polished, defensive way educated men do when they think language can still save them. Then she showed him the office note from the blue folder. Client fatigued. Niece VM request to be finalized today before LJ returns from pharmacy. He stared at it too long. That was mistake number 1. Did you write this? Celeste asked. It appears to be an internal office notation. That was not my question. He swallowed. Yes, and who is VM? He hesitated. You could feel it. That pause. That stupid, doomed pause. Vanessa Mercer. And why would Vanessa Mercer be requesting finalization of estate papers? If the estate plan was solely directed by your client? He shifted in his seat. Beneficiaries often have logistical concerns. Logistical concerns? Celeste repeated. Is that your professional term for instructing timing around when a caretaker is absent? He looked toward his attorney. Judge Pike said, "Answer the question." Harlan cleared his throat. It was not unusual for family members to participate in scheduling. Celeste tilted her head. Scheduling. Interesting word. Let's talk about your dinner on June 12th. Vanessa's head snapped up. There it was. The photograph had landed. Celeste handed the photo to the clerk, who handed it to Harlan. Do you recognize the people shown? He looked like someone had opened a window inside him and let all the blood out. Yes, who are they? Myself and Vanessa Mercer. Were you in a personal relationship with Ms. Mercer while drafting revisions to Evelyn Mercer's estate documents? His attorney objected so hard he nearly barked. Judge Pike overruled again. Harlan said nothing. Judge Pike leaned forward. Mr. Harlan, you are under oath. He closed his eyes, and in that moment I saw it. Not innocence, not confusion, calculation collapsing. Yes, he said. The courtroom erupted, not loudly. This wasn't television. But gasps, movement, whispers, the human ripple when scandal stops being rumor and becomes record. Vanessa went pale enough to look powdered. Harlan kept talking. Maybe because once cowardly men start confessing, they get weirdly eager to make confession sound noble. It did not affect my judgment, he said. Celeste's voice turned razor thin. You had a concealed personal relationship with the primary beneficiary of a contested will you supervised. You conducted private visits around medication windows. You retained notes reflecting beneficiary timing requests. You now stand before this court with a signature the forensic examiner has described as simulated. And your testimony is that your judgment was unaffected? He had no good answer. So Celeste gave him a worse problem. She introduced billing records subpoenaed the day before. 3 estate conference entries. 2 of them billed on days. Aunt Evelyn's medical chart showed sedative administration within 90 minutes of the meeting. The 3rd billed on a date when the nursing note recorded disorientation and slurred speech. Celeste placed those beside the execution date of the will. Then she asked the question that cut his legs out from under him. Can you identify a single independent, disinterested witness who can testify that Evelyn Mercer knowingly and freely approved the final document as executed? Harlan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Vanessa. And that, right there, finished him. Because silence can be louder than testimony when the question should have had an easy answer. Judge Pike stared at him for 3 solid seconds before saying, I see. Those 2 words were a funeral bell. Vanessa's attorney tried damage control after that. Claimed poor judgment wasn't fraud. Claimed personal impropriety wasn't undue influence. Claimed family bitterness had inflated coincidence into conspiracy. But the structure had cracked. Then Celeste made one last move. She asked leave to submit Aunt Evelyn's sealed memorandum from the blue folder in full. Judge Pike allowed it. Celeste read the relevant portion into the record. If a later will appears giving Vanessa my home, I ask that it be challenged with every lawful step available. I did not raise that girl to mistake access for love. That line hit harder than any legal argument. Because suddenly Aunt Evelyn was back in the room, not physically, but morally. Her voice, her judgment, her warning, and Vanessa heard it too. I know she did because something changed in her face. For the first time since the funeral, she didn't look angry, she looked exposed. Judge Pike recessed for 40 minutes before issuing preliminary findings. Those 40 minutes lasted 10 years. I sat on the hallway bench with my hands locked so tightly together my knuckles hurt. Pastor Boone prayed quietly beside me. Bernice muttered that liars always sweat under fluorescent lighting. Patrice cried in the ladies' room. Uncle Raymond paced until his knees gave out and then sat staring at the floor, like his whole idea of family had just been repossessed. Vanessa stayed at the far end of the corridor with her attorney, face hard, arms folded, no longer smiling. Good. When the judge returned, everybody stood. Judge Pike's ruling was sharp, controlled, and devastating. She found substantial evidence supporting continued challenge to the reported final will. She extended the injunction indefinitely. She ordered immediate suspension of Walter Harlan from any further role in the estate. She referred the matter for disciplinary review based on conflict of interest, compromised document handling, and potential ethical misconduct. She directed full forensic and evidentiary proceedings on the disputed will, and pending final determination. She recognized the prior uncontested estate framework and the decedent's memorandum a sufficient basis to freeze all benefit claims by Vanessa Mercer. Then she turned directly toward Vanessa. Ms. Mercer, she said, this court is not yet making a final finding of fraud, but I will say this plainly: your conduct since the decedent's death has not resembled grief, stewardship, or good faith. It has resembled opportunism. That word landed like a slap. Opportunism. Not inheritance, not family concern, not confusion. Opportunism. Vanessa stared straight ahead. Judge Pike wasn't done. To the extent you have entered, searched, directed removal, attempted lock change, or solicited post-death narrative support in relation to this property, you are instructed to cease immediately. One more misstep and I will consider sanctions personally. Then she closed the matter for the day. And just like that, Vanessa didn't own the room anymore. Or the house, or the story, outside the courthouse. Reporters hadn't gathered. Small town. Not that kind of case, but gossip moves faster than cameras in places like ours. People stood on sidewalks pretending not to watch. Cars slowed. Heads turned. Vanessa came down the courthouse steps stiff and silent. Harlan slipped out another door entirely, like shame had finally taught him how to use a side exit. I stood at the top of the steps with Celeste, Pastor Boone, Bernice, and Patrice. Vanessa stopped halfway down and looked back at me for a second. I thought she might still try dignity. Instead she said, "You think this makes you special?" I looked at her with all the exhaustion, grief, love, and fury of the last week sitting inside my chest. "No," I said. "It makes me right." She laughed once, bitter and broken around the edges. "And Evelyn promised me that house years ago." There it was again, promised. Celeste stepped slightly forward, but I held up a hand. "I wanted this one." I went down 2 steps toward Vanessa. "Maybe she did promise you something once," I said. "Maybe she promised you a chance. Maybe she promised you love. Maybe she promised you family. But somewhere along the line, you decided a house meant more than any of that." Her eyes flashed wet for the first time. "You weren't there before," she said. "Not like people think." That made me stop. Not because I agreed. Because buried inside that line was a real wound, not greed alone, old resentment, old accounting. Old competition. Vanessa had not just wanted the house, she had wanted proof that she mattered more, and somewhere in her broken head, property had become love with a deed attached. I said it before I could stop myself. She didn't owe you the house to prove she loved you. Vanessa's face crumpled for half a second. Then came back harder. "She owed me something." "No," I said quietly. "She owed us honesty. And you stole even that." She turned and walked away before I could say anything else. And just like that, the woman who had smiled at the funeral left, looking like somebody who had finally understood that winning and deserving are not the same thing. The final proceedings took another 6 weeks. 6 long weeks of filings, sworn statements, document review, accounting analysis, medical testimony, and the slow, ugly work of dragging truth into daylight where it can't hide behind nice clothes. In the end, the disputed final will was set aside. The court found the signature unreliable, the execution process compromised, and the surrounding conduct too infected by conflict and undue influence to sustain validity. Walter Harlan resigned from practice before the disciplinary board finished with him. Vanessa was not criminally charged. There wasn't enough clean proof for that, but the judge's final findings destroyed her credibility in probate court and in town. Her claim collapsed. Her family harmony campaign died. People who had repeated her version of things started speaking soft around me. Funny how truth changes volume. The estate reverted to the prior valid framework, supplemented by the memorandum and evidentiary record Aunt Evelyn had left behind. The house came to me legally fully not because I begged not because I manipulated, because the woman who lived and died there had seen the storm coming and left just enough behind for me to finish the fight. The first night after it was all over, I sat alone on Aunt Evelyn's porch wrapped in one of her old shawls while the evening settled over the yard. Everything looked the same. Same steps. Same rose bushes. Same cracked paint. But peace doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it comes like a tired exhale after weeks of holding your breath. I took Aunt Evelyn's Bible out of my lap and opened the front cover. Inside, in her handwriting, was something I hadn't noticed before. Small, slanted, certain. A house is not love. A deed is not loyalty. The one who stays is the one who knows where the truth is buried. I laughed through tears so sudden I had to cover my face. That old woman, even in death, she got the last word. Patrice started coming by on Sundays after that. At first to help sort papers, then for dinner, then just because silence feels less heavy when somebody kind is sitting in it with you. Uncle Raymond took longer. Pride is a stubborn disease in men who think being wrong makes them smaller. But one afternoon he came by with a toolbox and repaired the loose porch rail without saying much. Before he left, he stood in the yard looking up at the house and said, "Your aunt would be glad it stayed with somebody who cared for it." For Raymond, that was practically an apology written in gold. I accepted it, not because it erased anything, because not everyone needs a speech. Some just need truth and time in the same room long enough to stop bleeding. As for Vanessa, I heard she moved to counties over after the case ended, took a job at a real estate office for a while, then lost it when somebody recognized her last name and started asking questions she couldn't answer cleanly. I don't know if that's true. Small towns decorate their justice with rumors sometimes. I do know this. She never came back for the house, she never challenged the ruling again, and she never smiled at another Mercer funeral. Because after all that mess, nobody in the family would trust her near the dead. Months later, when spring finally pushed Green back into the yard, I cleaned out Aunt Evelyn's cedar chest in the hallway closet. At the bottom, under old quilts and winter scarves, I found an envelope with my name on it. Just Loretta. Nothing else. Inside was a single recipe card for her peach cobbler and a note. Baby, if you're reading this, then I was right about two things. Vanessa was too hungry, and you were too stubborn to let the truth go. Good. Keep the house warm, keep the table full, and don't let grief turn you mean. That last line sat with me for a long time, because grief can do that. It can hollow you, harden you, make you worship fairness until you forget mercy. But Aunt Evelyn, even after everything, had not asked me to become cruel, just strong. So that's what I became. Strong enough to keep the house, strong enough to survive the lies, strong enough to know that justice is not always loud, and love is not always soft. Sometimes justice is a blue folder in a bank box. Sometimes love is a dead woman leaving breadcrumbs for the one person she trusts. And sometimes the truth sits quietly for years, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. When people in town ask now how I kept Aunt Evelyn's house, I tell them the same thing every time. I didn't take it. I protected what she tried to leave behind. And that is the truth, the whole truth, the kind nobody can forge.